Hey, Pioneers. Welcome to episode number 467. Today's episode, we are diving into the topic of livestock herding dogs. Now, you might not have livestock yet, but if you plan on having livestock, I highly recommend that you listen to this episode. I also think from a historical standpoint and understanding how herding instincts and how herding has been used historically is also something that's really important. A lot of our modern agriculture, when we look at it, we're obviously using modern aspects, hence modern agriculture, and we are talking about modern homesteading, but it's marrying the best parts of historical methods of homesteading and those traditional skill sets using the traditional methods and putting kind of the best together, the best of the modern world with the best of the historical. And when we look at modern agriculture, especially when we're talking about beef cattle and those types of things, I think it's really important that we look at how historically this different species were used in order to help get the management done. And I think that's something in this day and age. Now, full disclosure, we do have a four-wheeler and I do use that. But oftentimes we see a lot of our modern ranching and modern farming and modern agriculture where we're using a lot of the modern things that we don't lose the knowledge and the know-how of using some of these historical methods. And honestly, when you look at a herding dog versus a piece of equipment, yes, there is a lifespan on dogs, right? There's also a lifespan on equipment. But there is something special about having a bond with another living animal. In this case, when we're talking about the herding dogs. And today's episode, I love the way that Jordyn breaks down. If you don't have any experience, which I don't, in really understanding how to train dogs, things that you should be looking for in herding dogs. We actually had a herding dog before. We did not use her for livestock. You'll hear about that in this episode. But a lot of our frustrations with her was simply because we did not have a good solid understanding of what a herding dog needs and matching that with the dog. So regardless if you ever plan on having livestock and herding dogs, I think that you are really going to get a lot of value out of today's episode and highly encourage you to listen to it. Our guest today is a Colorado native, and Jordyn Kelly. She grew up loving nature and animals, but dogs were always her favorite. And she dreamed as a young girl of becoming a vet. Though that dream was never realized, it is no surprise that she has become an expert on herding dogs. She and her family have grown their business and homestead, and she relishes the opportunity to share herding demonstrations and be a point of contact for any questions related to having dogs, from nutrition to training to troubleshooting problem behaviors and getting started in herding. She has done an incredible amount of research and the work to be a reliable source on all things dogs. Big thank you to our sponsor of this week's podcast, which is Azure Standard. They make it possible for us to continue to put out this podcast. And on the topics of dogs, if you did not know, Azure Standard also has dog treats. They have freeze-dried beef liver as well as freeze-dried beef kidney dog treats, along with other options. They've got some different food toppers and different things for your pets, as well as having a fabulous selection of food. We use Azure Standard. I actually get my chicken feed through Azure Standard. And we get a lot of our products here on the homestead for things that we're not growing and producing ourselves. Definitely check them out. They are especially wonderful for bulk food items. I have done price per pound comparisons. The awesome thing is that Azure Standards are usually organic or raised with at least organic, if not better practices. Done ethically with regenerative agriculture in mind. And even at that, pricing per pound with regular grocery store items, you can save a lot of money by buying bulk with Azure Standard. I did a price comparison of just sugar, flour, wheat, and wheat berries, and it was for a year's worth based on an average of what you would use in a year. The savings per pound were well over $800 for a year. There is no price to join, and If you use coupon code Melissa15, then you will get 15% off your first order of $100 or more. So big, huge thank you to Azure Standard for sponsoring today's episode. And now into my talk with Jordyn. Well, Jordyn, welcome to the Pioneering Today podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I am really excited to dive into today's topic. And full disclosure, you and I had a wonderful interview. And was the one time that the recording, something distorted it. So we get to come back for round two, but I'm really excited that we get to talk about this topic again, because I think it is such an important one. And I was thinking about this last night. I feel like this used to be something like in the farmer's skill set in the homesteading world that was so commonplace, centuries ago. And it still is in many parts of the world, but at least into the Western modern society, I feel like this is something that is not as prevalent as it used to be. Like it's not a lost skill per se, but I feel like it's one that is not as commonplace. Whereas back in the day, I think pretty much every farmer almost used herding dogs. If they had, sheep, any type of herding or Lord have mercy. If they had livestock that was in herds. That's what I was trying to say. So I'm excited to dive into this because I know for some folks you'd be like, oh gosh, like this was always around me. But I think for a good portion of people, like I grew up, my dad had a cattle herd of 130 head of cows when I was growing up, and no herding dogs whatsoever. So I think his life probably would have been a lot easier in some aspects. So I think this is an important topic that's probably not talked about as much in the conversation of homesteads and livestock particular.
Yeah.
So now that I've rambled on, what specifically, let's talk about herding dogs and what a herding dog actually does. What is their purpose? And kind of dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what you were talking about was in today's society, we have a lot more modernization. And so, you have a wide variety of different tools that, claim to make things easier, but it might be a little more complicated and it might have a greater barrier to entrance because of the cost that is kind of correlated with that. So, with a herding dog, so a herding dog is a dog that has been bred and intentionally bred for the use of animal husbandry and then also livestock management. And so this is a dog that is not a guardian. A lot of people think that guardian dogs and herding dogs are one and the same. They work completely opposite. So a herding dog is going to really focus on maintaining control and really controlling if there is chaos in the livestock, helping to figure out the cause. These dogs are great at problem solving, which makes them super handy on a farm or a homestead. But there are over 30 breeds of herding specific dogs, part of the American Kennel Club. And of course, there's some breeds that are not considered in the American Kennel Club, but there are 30 different herding breeds and bred for different livestock use, bred for different terrain, different climate. And so it really just kind of depends what livestock you have, kind of where you're at, and then what your needs are for that dog. So like if you're constantly having to rotate your livestock, if you do rotational grazing, there's some breeds that are better suited for that. Or if you maintain them in a lot, but you need to sort them regularly, or you need to have hands-on animal husbandry, whether you're, vaccinating or having to treat them for anything, there's some breeds that are better suited for that. And so that's where there's not just one herding breed that's best for all. There's definitely a couple that could be very versatile, but really thinking about what you have and what you need the dog for can help make a better choice.
Okay. You almost like when you said one for when you're sorting, I'm like, oh, a cutting dog instead of a cutting horse. Is it kind of
Right.
where my brain went? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty much.
okay. I love that. I have to say, I think a dog is going to be a lot less expensive than a cutting horse, in all honesty. I've owned horses before
Probably.
and love them, but they're not cheap. Um, so for now, I'm very much intrigued. So as far as different breeds, of the dog for that, what would be a breed that would be more towards the sorting aspect
Mhm.
versus one for like mob grazing, rotational grazing, etc. type where you're just moving the entire herd from place to place versus splitting parts of the herd off and out?
Mhm. Honestly, like, I've seen a lot more of Australian cattle dogs, being great for sorting cattle specifically just because they are bred to be a grittier dog. They are bred to head and heel, hence the name. Uh, well, they're commonly referred to as a healer because they were bred specifically to go and nip at the heel. Like there's way more into the structure of the dog, the look of the dog, you know, why their face is structured a certain way. And it is so if they are kicked towards the head, it's not going to damage them the same way it would if you had like a border collie that has a flatter head. And so there's a lot more to the structure and the function of the dog for the livestock you want to use them on than just, oh, I think that one looks pretty. Um, and so you have grittier breeds that are meant to go be able to move their bodies in more versatile ways. So, like, I have Australian Shepherds, and they're referred to as a very versatile breed because typically you dock the tail, which helps in preventing damage. If an Australian Shepherd is kept a tail, it's long and full. It can easily get caught in brush. It can easily get stepped on. And the thing with tails is they don't have nerve endings, and so that can be a operational hazard for the dog. But they can. uh, Australian Shepherds are known to have really good bite inhibition, so they know how hard to bite and when to bite. And so that also makes them useful in terms of either keeping livestock off of feed or if you know, need one specific, you know, that is kind of addressed in herding trials as well, because one of the more advanced parts of a herding trial is you actually have to sort different livestock that like have a ribbon on them, and so that's really key is your dog being able to work with you to sort those specific animals out.
Okay, let's actually back up for just a minute for somebody who may be newer to livestock movement or some of the terminology. So let's
Mhm.
give it just a brief definition of what healing and heading and what that means, as in, you know, from usually healing it's going to be pushing livestock in a like you're driving them, you're pushing them away, whereas heading is a little bit different. So do you want to just give a
Mhm.
brief what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of herding dogs, you want a dog that has the confidence to head and heel. That's really desirable in a dog, and it just really speaks in the confidence. So, heading is where the dog is able to confront livestock straight on, head on, where the dog does not back down if an animal turns and faces it. And that's where, you know, if you've been around livestock at all, if an animal turns and faces you and says, "Hey, I'm not moving," you know, you have to be able to apply appropriate pressure to then turn the animal back away from you. And so for livestock or for working dogs, it's having that confidence to say, nope, I know you just turned towards me, but I'm going to meet you with extra pressure until you turn around and start going where I want you to go. Whereas healing is more focused on the back of the animal. So the animal is already moving, but maybe the animal's not moving at the speed or the direction that a dog wants the livestock to go, or maybe if you're not moving the livestock in a certain area. So like you see this more if you've watched any like movies or videos of dogs herding a large group of sheep or cattle, they are at the back of them, nipping at their heels to get them to move faster or to get them to move in a direction. And so heading and heeling can be beneficial depending on the situation that you need the livestock to move.
Okay. Um, in differences between sheep and cattle, as far as heading and healing, are there certain breeds that are better with sheep or better with cattle? Or if the dog is just trained well, it's able to herd both of those types of livestock?
So ideally, you want a dog that can be versatile and herd everything from, hot cattle to, sensitive ducklings or chickens. But that's really where a lot of times in today, breeders of working dogs, they want the versatility, but a lot of the times you'll find one that breeds for a certain type of dog that herds certain things better. So, like with the Australian Shepherds, there are certain lines and certain breeders that breed for dogs that are able to handle large cattle operations. And then you have breeders that maybe focus more on agility and having dogs that have speed, that can jump, that, aren't necessarily as focused on working livestock, but they can still be beneficial for people that want to get into sporting. Um, so there are some breeds that do better on different livestock, but that's where you can also have a dog that might do well on anything. It kind of comes down to the dog and then looking back at the pedigree of the dog, looking back at the parents, at the working ability of them to see, would that be a good fit for what you're looking for?
Okay. So when it comes to looking for herding breeds specifically, what kind of sets them apart? Because I'm sure somebody's like, oh, well, maybe it's just the training, right? Like I'll just take a breed, maybe the dog that I have, or I'm going to, have a puppy that's maybe doesn't have pedigree or whatnot, but like I'm going to try to train them to herd. So maybe
Mhm.
diving a little bit into the breed nuances. And I know this was something we talked about in the past that I think was really important too. And are they that breed or not just the breed, excuse me, but
Mhm.
coming from parents that are working that it's a working lineage in the herding aspect. Can you talk a little bit
Right.
to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially today, there's a lot of dog breeders that are not really focused on the original purpose of the dog. You have a lot of people, especially with not to dog on them at all, but especially like the doodle movement, because they're cute and pretty, and there's a lot more focus on the looks and the desirable looks of the dog than the function and the workability of the dog. And so, in my experience, I have Australian Shepherds that don't work, and I have Australian Shepherds that do work. And really looking at their pedigree tells me a lot more and speaks into their drive and ability to work. I have two brothers from our first litter. One is a chicken killer and eater, the other one is a chicken herder and would not lay a paw on a feather. Um, and the one that works beautifully. He's a great example of the Australian Shepherd, and his brother is not at all. Same parents, same litter, raised the same way, but because that pairing was not focused on the workability, I have that variable. And so, that litter was a great example to us to go, you know what, let's instinct test, because we do have some families that want just a companion. And then we have some families that want a working dog for their farm or homestead. And so ever since then, we now instinct test everybody to say, okay, these puppies would excel in a working environment, or these puppies don't really have a working drive, but they would be great companions for families. And that's really where the goals of the breeder is important to look at, but then also looking at the workability of the parents. If you have if you breed two working dogs, you're going to have more of those puppies from them still have the drive, still have the instinct to work versus, oh, it's an Australian Shepherd, but it might not work. And so you might have the right breed, but maybe not the right dog. But that's also where paying attention to a lot of times people say, oh, I grew up with this type of dog and it was the best farm dog ever. That might be the one-off scenario. You know, Chihuahuas are not historically great at herding. And so you wouldn't get a Chihuahua and expect it to be a herding dog. Um, same thing as like if someone has a lab, but they want it to work poultry, that might not actually work out. It might, but that's again going to be your one-off scenario. And so here you're really reducing the risk and you're maximizing the opportunity for the dog if you put in the time and energy to research and really seek out someone who does with their dogs what you're doing. And we see this a lot in like the homesteading, I'm gonna call it movement, but people seek out breeders of livestock that are raising the livestock they in the way that they want to raise them. And that's going to be way more beneficial in the long run versus going just to an auction and picking up, a flock of sheep for $400 and then getting home and you have 6 sheep because they're not used to the setup that you want them to be. So there's a lot of variables that go into that.
Yeah, there is. And I think it's important when you were talking about the instinct in the puppies and doing that instinct testing on ones that these have the instincts that they're going to naturally want to herd, be a herding dog versus just be a companion dog. And she was kind of a rescue when my husband and I were first married. We didn't have any livestock. And she had those. Now looking back, I'm like, oh, I wish we had her now. That was like 20 years ago. She had those working instincts, but we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have anything for her to work. And so it ended up resulting in undesirable behavior, but it was because she was being denied what she wanted to do. So, for those that haven't been around working herd dogs, I should say, or that
Mm-hmm.
have the working instinct, what are their common behaviors of herding dogs?
Yeah. So most common is nipping. A lot of people will rehome a herding breed because they get it and it's either a family member or someone in the house is too much and the dog acts like a dog. And the biggest thing that we've done in our program is day one, no puppies nibble on us. If they try to nibble on us, even though it might be cute, we always redirect to a bone or a toy. And that's like the number one thing that I see whenever we are socializing our puppies. We take them to like a local farmer's market just for socializing. We say they're not for sale, they're just here to be loved on. Every person wants to stick their fingers in the puppy's mouth because they think it's cute, because they're teething and they don't know how to bite hard yet, but that only starts the conversation with the puppy that chewing on people is okay. And so from day one, we do not allow nipping. You do not chew on me. You do not even like think to nibble on me for fun. It's not a fun game because then if we're not allowing that behavior, it's not going to continue into adulthood. A great example of this, my parents have 3 dogs from us, and one of them, when she was a puppy, my dad would mess with her, rah, 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 mess with his hands. He now is much older and on blood thinner, and one good scratch and he won't stop bleeding for the rest of the day.
Mhm.
And, she's now 6 years old, but she still acts that way with him because he started that when she was little. And so the biggest thing is nipping. But if you do not allow your dog to nibble on you at all from the time you get them, there is less likelihood that they're going to do that to you. And that's a very, very common behavior because that's what they were bred to do. If an animal is being too unruly or too chaotic, like a appropriate bite or a nip is going to stop that behavior in the livestock. And so a lot of times you'll see people who give up their herding dog, and it's normally because they've nipped a child. And that is because the child was too chaotic in that situation and the dog just wanted it to stop. Um, but that's where it kind of goes back to, you have to set appropriate boundaries between the dog, but then also you also have to teach kids, hey, we're not going to be wild and chaotic around this dog because this dog was bred to control the chaos. And so if you're chaotic and the dog interrupts you to stop the behavior, you shouldn't have been doing that behavior in the first place too. Because that's where we can't expect dogs to not act like dogs. At the end of the day, like we do have to go, this is an animal, this is a living, breathing thing. We can do as much training as possible, but if this has been bred into them for centuries and generations, it's not something that we can, change in them, but we can change our behavior and how we respond to that. So that's the most common behavior. Another behavior is that we see a lot. We call it FOMO, fear of missing out. And a great way to remedy this is with puppies, teaching them the art of doing nothing. Otherwise, you're going to have a overly anxious, overly controlling dog that, if you leave the room, the dog's like, don't leave me here, don't leave me here. But if you teach them from a young age, we're just not going to do anything. They're just going to lay here. We're not going to go anywhere. We're not doing anything. So a lot of times when I tell people I have Australian Shepherds, they go, oh my gosh, you must have like anxious dogs and they must be super high strung. That's not how the breed was. That's not what the breed was bred for. Like, yes, they can be high energy and they can match the energy of the livestock if I need them to work, high energy livestock and get them to calm down. But I don't have wild, crazy dogs in my house. And I think that's a common misconception, is that anxiety in dogs is common, but it's not meant to be. And so a lot of people that don't work their working breed dogs see that behavior. And it really goes back to, you just have to teach the dog a place. You have to teach the art of doing nothing. A great tool for this is behavioral downs. So it is, was created from a gentleman. His program is called Training Between the Ears, but it focuses more on what the dog is going through psychologically. And really, behavioral downs are forcing the dog to just kind of be there with their thoughts and work through that anxiety and calm themselves down. You're not training the dog to do anything, but you're just tethering the dog where the dog cannot go anywhere, must stay where it's at, but then work through what it's going through to help lower that anxiety and go back to maintaining a calm disposition.
Right. So walk me through practically, what does it look like when you're giving them that downtime? I know you mentioned tethering. So is that,
Mhm.
do you stay with the dog? Is it just simply like tying them up so that they can't move for a specific period of time, or you're looking for certain signs? Like, what does that look like in really like practical step by step?
Yeah. So normally when you start working with a dog with behavioral downs, it's so you have a leash connected to a collar on them, and you stand on the leash, but you give them just enough leash to be able to stand up. So not more than that, so that they can walk around, but they just kind of are tethered, in a sense. And so this is a great thing to practice. Like if you're standing at the kitchen counter and like working on something for a little bit, or if you're sitting down in your chair or the couch, for a good little bit, it's a great thing to practice in that sense. But the focus is, you're not interacting with the dog at all. You're not petting them. You're not telling them lay down. You're not telling them anything. You're just kind of ignoring the dog. And the desired behavior from that is the dog laying down, putting their head on the floor completely, taking a good deep sigh, and staying laying down like that for at least a minute. And then once you get that desired behavior for at least a minute, then you can unhook the leash and let them go about their day. Again, like just kind of ignoring the dog, but just doing that. And normally it takes 15 to 30 minutes the first time you do that with the dog, which sounds like a long time. It is, but it's the dog really having to work through all of that anxiety or the hyper focus or hyper fixation on different things. Um, but usually when I start a dog off with that, I try to do a couple times a day, if I can. And then you can reduce it to once a day and then every other day and then maybe 1 or 2 times a week. And this is a tool that I keep in my tool belt of if then I'm working a dog and the dog starts repeatedly ignoring what I'm asking the dog to do, okay, it's time to do some more behavioral downs because they obviously have something more important going on in their mind that they cannot focus on what I'm asking them to do. But it kind of like for us as people, when we get too anxious, too stressed, we kind of have to go to a quiet place and just really work through it. And the dogs don't know how to regulate that themselves. And so this is a tool that allows them to go to that quiet place, work through whatever they're needing to work through so that they can have clarity. And you see a huge change in their behavior if you do behavioral downs with a dog. You see a dog that listens better. You see a dog that is not hyper fixated on different things. You see a dog that wants to listen to you more. And so it starts like that. And then what I'll do is I will then transfer that if we have a day where we're going to work out in the garden. I might tether a dog to the garden fence. They can't go anywhere, can't do anything, but they have enough room where they can stand up, kind of like they might have 2 feet of leash, where they can walk a little bit where they're at, but then they can just lay down and get comfortable. And this teaches the dog you don't have to go and focus on anything. You don't have to go and do anything. You're just going to stay right here and you can lay down and watch us work. Sometimes it might be where I tether the dog and we're not outside, but they just need a little time to chill out a little bit. We do this with our younger dogs because they sometimes need a lot more structure than our older dogs. Our older dogs will naturally go and if we're working in the garden, they all lay down beside the garden fence anyways. But the younger dogs might need a little bit more of structure in terms of that. And so that's really where it kind of just depends on the day and how the energy level is with the dog, what I choose to do. But it really starts with we're going to do it in the house with minimal distractions. And then we can transfer that outside where there's a little bit more distractions, but the expected behavior is still the same. So normally with dog training, there's the 3 Ds of dog training to continue success in whatever you're working on. And that is distance, distraction, and duration. And so applying those 3 things, adding in more distance, adding in more distraction, and adding in more duration solidifies the desired behavior that you want for that dog.
Okay, that is great. I appreciate that. Very, very practical, hands-on. I wish I had had that tool previously when we had the healer that we had. So, is there a minimum amount of land or animals that you really need to have for your herding dog?
I don't think so. I think you really need to do the research on the breed and rather than just going and getting a working puppy from someone down the road that had working bred dogs. I think doing a little bit more research and knowing what your expectations are for the dog is going to be important. Um, for us, thankfully, we had picked a versatile breed to begin with. And so we had the dogs before we had the homestead. Before we bought our property, we only have an acre and a quarter. But before we bought our property, we did a lot more hiking. We did kayaking, paddleboarding with our dogs. When we lived in the city, we would go to the dog park every day. So like we still were meeting our higher energy dog's needs. And I think unless you have that lifestyle or like are able to meet those needs of a herding breed beforehand, I would hold off on it. And so we had the dogs before the homestead. And so it was kind of like a seamless movement into when we got our first chickens. And my 10-month-old Australian Shepherd puppy was like, I love working chickens. It was like, oh, this is cool. Now I get to use him to help me on the farm. Whereas like his brother is the notorious chicken killer. But funny enough, now I have chickens that don't hop the fence because they know if they do, I have a dog that's going to
Eat them.
make sure, yes, yeah, if they don't fly back in their dinner. And I, I just, the other day I had moved my chickens over and I did not need a dog. And I, I had my husband come out and I said, look at this. All I did, I just moved one little fence panel and my goose and all of my chickens just like move over into the next section where I'm about to set the fence up. And they just start picking at the ground. And I said, how cool is this? My chickens are now trained instead of needing a dog because the chickens are like, cool, we're going to go everywhere. They've been worked enough by the dogs to know we're just going to calmly walk over to the next section and the lady is going to put the fence up. But you might end up getting livestock that is trained that way if you work them enough with a dog. But in that sense, I don't think that there is a minimum requirement. It just is, do you have the ability to meet the dog's needs? And if you don't necessarily have livestock for them to work, trick training is a great way to do it. Or if you go hiking or if you go walking, that's a great way to still meet that dog's needs. But then you can also think forward into the future of, well, do we want to have more land someday? Do we want to have more livestock? You can still get the dog before you get the livestock and work on that bond building so that when you do get livestock, you already have a dog that wants to work for you. But now you're just adding in a new thing for the dog to learn how to work. And we kind of did this with one of our dogs. I bred her to a higher drive working bred dog because I wanted a puppy that would have a little bit more grit and drive because someday I would like to have cows. And I would love to have a dog that already has the grit and drive in her, but is already bonded to me to want to work for me with cows. And so we kept a puppy back from that breeding, and that's Rogue. And she just turned 2 years old. But I'm so excited to, in the next few years, get larger property and add cows into the mix and work her because, man, she is a working machine. But she's a little too much for my sheep sometimes because she has that higher drive. She's like, I'm ready to get in, get it done, let's go. And so that's, again, just kind of goes back to you have to really think big picture on this too, because a dog is a 10 to 15 year commitment. And so it's not just oh, well, we might just get it for this season, like you can do with livestock. And so really, I don't think there's a minimum. I don't think there's a maximum, but it just is really being honest with your situation and what your needs are.
Yeah, I love that. So for folks who are wanting to look further into having working dogs for livestock and all of that, I know you've got some great resources. Where's it best for people to connect with you and like the top resource?
Yeah. So connecting with us, we're online, of course, Working Aussies Homestead. And we have a website. We also have a YouTube channel. I do have some videos on there about our working dogs and getting started, what that looks like, just on the homestead. I have a few videos on there where I just am like, this is just our day with our dogs. But another great resource is workingaussiesource.com. And that has a great list of herding dog trainers across the country, as well as Australian Shepherd breeders listed in there. They always have like litter listings, but then also It's just a good resource anyways. If you're wanting to really get a feel for a certain breed, I would recommend auditing at a herding trial near you. One of the great recommendations would be AHBA, which is All Herding Breeds Association, and they host trials all over the country. But attending one of those, because it's all breeds, you get to see everything from a Buceron to a Sheltie um, to an English Shepherd to an Australian Shepherd to a Border Collie, Australian Cattle Dog. I've even seen Bernese Mountain Dogs, out there herding. And so that would be a great way for you to see how the breed works in an environment that is meant to showcase what the dog can do. And so normally auditing is free to do at herding trials. And it just means you just go and watch. But then you can kind of pick the brains of people that go. And normally the people that go to herding trials are people who love talking about their dogs. And so that's a great place to go and do that too.
Yeah. And you have a book too, correct?
Yes. Last year I wrote a book. It's Herding on the Homestead, Start Where You Are. And I just really wanted to kind of empower people to feel like they could start with what they have instead of feeling like they need to wait until they have 100 acres or 10 cows or a huge flock of sheep. Start with what you have small and just have the end goal in mind. And so I share a lot of my experience with my dogs. I also talk about why you would choose one breed over another, what it looks like to get started with teaching manners and then livestock introduction. So I try to cover a little bit of everything so that it could be for someone who might already have a dog and want to get into it, or someone who's like, I'm interested, but I don't know where to start. And kind of a lot of the herding world and working dogs, there's a lot of gatekeeping, and it's very intimidating. And so I wanted to kind of lower that barrier to entry and allow more people to feel like they can do this too. Because I think you're right. In the beginning you said that this used to be something that was a lot more common, and it's not. And it's almost like we have so much information out there that we feel like we can't do more than we can. And there needs to be resources and people out there saying anybody can do this. You might mess up a little bit. There might be some livestock loss, but that's kind of the risk of trying something new too. And I can confidently say it's absolutely worth it to have a working dog.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Jordyn. And we'll have in the blog post that accompanies this episode, as well as the show notes, we'll have links to your book and those different resources you named off. So thank you so much. This was fun. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate talking about really your commitment level. There's so many behavioral issues with livestock that I see from horses back when I was helping to train horses and different things like that, that people don't realize, because I don't think anybody would ever intentionally do it, but it really is the handler or the owner in most
Mhm.
cases, the person handling the animal, that a lot of those behavioral issues arise. So I really appreciate that you really dive into that and talk about that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. As always, you can go to melissaknorris.com/467, because this is episode number 467, to find links and resources that were mentioned in today's episode. I can't wait to be back here with you next week. Blessings and mason jars for now, my friends.